All right, let's just jump right into this. I want you to think about something. What if our entire history, everything from the ancient pyramids all the way to the phone you're probably holding, is just the latest chapter in a story that is way, way longer than we think? What if we're not the first advanced civilization to call this planet home? What if we're something like the seventh?
So a quote like that, where does it even come from? Well, it comes from scholars trying to make sense of this 4,000-year-old clay prism. It's called the Weld-Blundell prism, and it holds a document known as the Sumerian king list. Now, it starts off pretty normal, listing kings and rulers, but then it gets really, really weird.
And by weird, I mean this weird. 241,200 years. Get this, that is the combined reign of just 8 kings. And according to this list, they ruled before a great flood supposedly wiped the slate clean. The very first king is said to have ruled for 28,800 years all by himself. So you just have to ask, what on earth is this ancient document trying to tell us?
Okay, so let's take a closer look at this impossible king list, because it's way more than just a list of names and some crazy numbers. It's a record that suggests a totally different timeline for human history than the one we all learned in school.
Okay, check this out, because a very clear pattern starts to show up when you look at the data. Before the flood, you have these absolutely astronomical reigns, tens of thousands of years. But after the flood, the text says kingship descended from heaven again, and something was different. The reigns, while still pretty long at first, start a steady, unmistakable decline. They go from over 1,000 years down to 126 years for a famous king like Gilgamesh, until eventually they settle into what we'd consider a normal human lifespan.
So, how do you even make sense of that? A lot of modern scholars just kind of write the numbers off as being symbolic. But there's another idea, a really fascinating one. What if we've been reading it all wrong? What if King Alalim isn't a single person who lived for 28,000 years, but is actually the name for an entire era? The Age of Alalim, a whole cycle of civilization personified as a single king.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The Sumerians weren't the only ones thinking like this. I mean, if this was just one weird text from one culture, you could maybe dismiss it. But this idea, this pattern of long, glorious ages, followed by some huge catastrophe and then a slow decline, it pops up all over the ancient world.
For example, just look at the parallels with the Hindu concept of the yugas. They talk about a Satya Yuga, a golden age, where people are virtuous and live for thousands of years. Sounds familiar, right? This is followed by shorter and shorter, more corrupt ages, until the world is basically destroyed and the whole cycle starts over. It's the exact same blueprint, a golden age, a massive reset, and then a decline.
And it doesn't stop there. The ancient Greeks had their 5 ages of man, starting with gold and declining to our current Iron Age. Norse mythology has Ragnarok, this epic cycle of destruction and rebirth of the world. The Aztecs told stories of 5 suns, 5 different worlds, each one wiped out by a cataclysm. You've got cultures separated by entire oceans that almost certainly never met, all telling the same basic story.
How? Now, that cataclysm, that reset button, the most common version of that story, the one you find almost everywhere, is a great world-ending flood. And we're not just talking about a local story that got around. This is a truly global memory.
I mean, get this. Researchers have found over 200 separate, distinct flood myths from cultures all over the planet, every inhabited continent. From the indigenous people of Australia to the tribes of the Americas to ancient India, the story is hauntingly similar. The waters rose, the old world was destroyed, and just a handful of survivors had to start all over again. You have to ask, why would everyone be telling this story if it wasn't based on something real?
Well, our planet's own history might have the answer. Right around the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, these gigantic ice sheets started melting. And this was not a slow, gentle process. There were events, like something geologists call meltwater pulse 1A, that caused sea levels to rise incredibly fast. For anyone living on the coast back then, and that's where most people lived, it would have been an absolute apocalypse. Their entire world would have literally been swallowed by the ocean.
So, if there were these advanced societies before that flood, societies that got almost totally wiped out, where's the proof? Where's the physical evidence? Well, let's look at some of the clues that really start to challenge our neat and tidy timeline of history.
First, you have to wrap your head around this massive gap in the timeline. We know that people who are just like us, behaviorally modern humans with the same brains, same creativity, have been around for at least 50,000 years. And yet, Our history books say complex civilization only got started in the last 10,000 or so. So, what were we doing for the other 40,000 years? Were we really just sitting around in caves? Or were we building things that are now lost to time?
And we do have hints. Strange, anomalous sites. Places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, this stunningly complex temple built 11,500 years ago, supposedly by simple hunter-gatherers. Then you have more controversial sites like Gunung Padang in Indonesia, or the underwater Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan. Now there's a lot of debate about these places, for sure, but they at least open the door to the possibility that our history is way older and more complicated than we've been led to believe.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces on the table. You've got these recurring myths from all over the world, you've got the geological evidence of a cataclysmic flood, and you've got these weird archaeological sites that don't fit the timeline. It all starts to point toward a pretty radical idea, that human history isn't a straight line up. It moves in cycles of rise and fall.
And if you start looking at our own recorded history through that lens, it starts to look like just one cycle among many. You could almost map it out, right? The Neolithic Revolution was a big step up. Then the Bronze Age empires. Then the classical world of Greece and Rome. The Renaissance, the Industrial Age. You could say our modern era is maybe the 5th or 6th major pulse in recorded history. But if you add in just one major lost civilization from before that great flood, well, that would make us the 7th.
Now, the best way to think about this isn't a flat circle, where we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes forever. It's more like a spiral. Imagine a spiral staircase. Each cycle, each civilization, is another loop around. We're climbing higher, building on the ruins and the memories of what came before. We're not just repeating the past, we're spiraling up from its foundations.
And this isn't just some cool, abstract historical theory. If any of this is true, it holds a really profound warning for us, for our civilization, right now. Because what's the one thing that all of these past cycles have in common? They all ended. And maybe the reason they collapsed is this crucial difference between technology and wisdom. See, we have mastered technology, the how to do things, no question. We can build skyscrapers, we can split atoms, we can fly to the moon. But wisdom, the part that knows which things are worth doing, how to live in balance with our planet, how to cooperate, that seems to be the part that gets easily lost between the cycles.
You know, maybe what those ancient scribes were trying to preserve wasn't just a list of kings. Maybe it was this idea of historical consciousness. This deep, profound awareness that we are just one link in a very, very long chain. They knew others came before them, and they knew others would come after. They knew their civilizations were temporary, so they tried to encode their deepest truths in myths and monuments, hoping, just hoping, to pass some of that wisdom forward.
So that really leaves us with a final and pretty heavy question. If we accept this pattern, if we accept that our own incredible civilization will one day also come to an end, what's the most important thing we can pass on to